Morning, everyone. We begin with the news of a major search for a woman who went missing while walking her dog in Lancashire. Police say her phone was connected to a conference call when it was discovered on a park bench. Nicola Bulley was last seen just after 9 o'clock on Friday morning in St Michael's on Wyre in Lancashire. It's understood that she dropped off her children at school before taking her dog for a walk near the River Wyre. Her partner, Paul Ansell, said, "It is just perpetual hell. We are living through this, but it doesn't feel real. All we can say is we need to find her. She's got two little girls that need their mummy home." Sadia with me here in the studio. Oh, my goodness, this is heartbreaking. What's happened?
Well, it's been 4 days now since Nicola Bulley was last seen by a member of the public as she was walking her dog in Lancashire. Her dog has since been found off its lead, close to where she was last seen, and her mobile phone was also found on a bench in that same area, and it was still connected to a conference call, presumably that she had been taking part in. Police have launched an extensive search of this major area around where she was last seen. They're being supported by fire and rescue, mountain rescue and also underwater search teams. It's a huge operation involving helicopters, dogs and drones. Now, they say they're keeping an open mind about what might have happened to her. They don't believe that she's been attacked, but they say that their fears are growing as time passes.
My goodness, she's got two little girls. She dropped them off at school. This was a walk that she normally did.
Yes, her partner, Paul Ansell, said that this is something that either one of them would do, drop the girls off to school and then go and walk the dog in that area. So he's very concerned. He's said that they're living through a perpetual hell, that it doesn't feel real. And he's put out that plea saying she has two little girls at home. They really need her to be back.
Yeah, so the police don't think a crime has been committed. Have they got any idea what might have happened at this stage? You said they're using dogs, they're using drones, they're using underwater search units.
Yes, because of the terrain of that area, they're being supported by mountain rescue, fire and rescue, and also underwater search teams. They say they're keeping an open mind. They don't know what's happened, but they did say that they don't believe that she's been attacked. They put out her description. She's described as white, 5'3", with light brown hair, which would have been tied up in a ponytail. They say she was wearing a long black gilet jacket. It has a hood, black jeans, and she had olive green wellies on. So they're asking anyone that may have been in the area who've seen her to contact them.
Yeah, I think I also heard yesterday that she speaks with an Essex accent, which might stand out in an area like Lancashire. So if anybody discovers her, is chatting to her, they just need to contact the police.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, OK, for now. Thanks very much indeed. Those poor family, my goodness, missing for 4 days. They found her phone. They found the dog and they don't know where she is. I can't even begin to imagine how they must be feeling. If you're watching this programme, if you know anything about it, please do contact the police. Her family are at home, worried out of their minds. Now, a bleak warning this morning on the UK economy from the International Monetary Fund, which says it will do worse than any other country in the developed world, even lagging behind Russia. Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, has more.
Now, if you've been following the news recently, you'll probably have heard that the economy is actually starting to perk up a bit, at least on a global basis. And we've just got the latest figures from the International Monetary Fund, and I want to show you what they're showing. This is for the global economy, so global growth. And last time around, this is what they were forecasting. So 2.7% this year, 3.2% next year. Look at how they've changed with their latest forecast. That latest bar has gone up. Actually, a fair bit. When you're talking about the global economy, 0.2 percentage points, that's quite an upgrade because things are looking better. Inflation might have peaked. It's a pretty good news story, but I'm afraid it doesn't get so good when you look at the UK. So this is just breaking it down, looking at major economies around the world and just how fast they're growing in this year, so 2023. And last time around, this is the forecast from last time around, the UK was expected to have 0.3% growth. Just look at how that's changed with these latest updates. Look at the red bar. It's gone all the way down to the bottom, no longer positive territory. Now it's 0.6% contraction. So basically, it's pointing towards a recession in the UK. And it is the worst in the G7. This is the G7 group of major industrialised economies from Japan all the way through to the UK. And you see the UK is by far and away the worst. And actually, when you look at all of the economies, so all major economies that the IMF is surveying, look, down there, there's the UK, 0.6%. And not only is it the worst here, it is actually worse than Russia. So Russia there with 0.3% growth, the UK minus 0.6%. It's pretty striking, isn't it? And I'm afraid it's not a very good news story when you look at the following year as well. 2024 as well, the UK down there at the bottom, actually joint worst with Italy and Japan. Why is all of this happening? Well, the IMF says it's basically because you've got the government raising taxes, you've got fiscal consolidation, as they call it, and the Bank of England raising interest rates at the same time. Add it all up, and I'm afraid, while it's good news for the global economy, it's not very good news for the UK economy.
Well, we've already had a government response to that forecast. Here we go. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, said the Governor of the Bank of England recently said that any UK recession this year is likely to be shallower than previously predicted. However, these figures confirm we are not immune to the pressures hitting nearly all advanced economies. We're still at the end, though, Jeremy. Short-term challenges should not obscure our long-term prospects. The UK outperformed many forecasts last year, and if we stick to our plan to halve inflation, the UK is still predicted to grow faster than Germany and Japan over the coming years, just not this year. The Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, said Britain has huge potential, but too many signs are pointing towards really difficult times for our economy, leaving us lagging behind our peers. She went on to say the government should be doing all it can to make our economy stronger and to get it growing. They would say, of course, that they are. It's the only way that we can move beyond lurching from crisis to crisis, as we have been for far too long. Talking about that with, amongst others, Jacob Rees-Mogg coming up very shortly. It's the anniversary of Brexit as well today. Can you believe it? Do you know how many years it is since we voted to leave the European Union? Yeah, I know. Check it out. No, it's more than 4. Now, if you've got kids, you might be struggling to know what to do with them tomorrow. With the news, the biggest teacher strike in years is to go ahead in England and Wales. Members of the National Education Union in England and Wales will walk out tomorrow over pay, with more action planned in the coming weeks. Up to 23,000 schools could be impacted by the walkout. Here we go. 7:30, we'll be speaking to the Joint General Secretary of the National Education Union, Kevin Courtney, over claims the Education Secretary squandered the opportunity to resolve the row. Well, MPs have backed anti-strike legislation, which is aimed at enforcing minimum service levels for some sectors during strikes. It's clear the Commons, but not without criticism from a prominent Tory backbencher and former Cabinet Minister. Jacob Rees-Mogg has criticised the sweeping powers and vague wording within the bill, suggesting the blame lay with incompetence within the government.
I mean, this is almost so skeletal that you wonder if bits of the bones have been stolen away by wild animals and taken and buried somewhere, as if, you know, in cartoon characters happens. I want good legislation. I want legislation that achieves its objective and that clarifies the boundaries of power between the legislature, the king in Parliament, and the courts.
Well, as I said, Mr Rees-Mogg on the programme just after 8, speaking to us about strikes, the state of the UK economy and Brexit. US President Joe Biden has said that America will not be sending F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine. It comes as Ukrainian officials have stepped up their calls for Western allies to send fourth-generation fighters like F-16s after securing supplies of battle tanks last week.
President, will the United States provide F-16s to Ukraine? No. Mr. President.
Our Security and Defence Editor, Deborah Haynes, is standing by in Kiev for us this morning. Hello to you, Deborah. Are we going to be sending jets, do you think, to Ukraine?
Well, it's a very live debate, isn't it, after Ukraine's success in obtaining these Western battle tanks. The UK Defence Secretary in the Commons yesterday was asked about whether or not the UK might be part of some sort of coalition of countries sending in fighter jets, and he sort of made the point that there's been a sort of track record of countries saying no to a certain piece of equipment, for example tanks, and then later saying yes, and saying that he was keeping an open mind. The same kind of noises have been made by President Macron of France, and Ukraine's defence minister is actually going to be visiting France this week, presumably as well, to talk about that. And just to give you a sense of why Ukraine is continuing to want ever more lethal weapons, Britain's Defence Intelligence Update, the daily report it gives, says today that Russia is likely aiming to develop a new axis of advance in the Donetsk region in the east of the country. It says it's likely that they will continue to make local gains down there, but it says it's unlikely that they're going to be making any significant operational breakthroughs. But it's a reminder of this grinding war and the threat it's going to escalate and the reason why Ukraine needs these weapons.
Yeah. When we were chatting, as you know, last week to President Zelensky, put it to him that, he's not going to get fighter jets because of the way they will be used. He said, yeah, people didn't think I was going to get tanks. And originally the Germans promised, what, helmets?
Well, exactly. The Germans went from helmets to sending in their Leopard 2 tanks. And he's right to sort of mention that positions change over time. I think with fighter jets there's a real nervousness, given that they operate obviously in the sky. Could they be used to target directly onto the Russian territory? I think that would be a lot of assurances needed to calm those nerves. And then also, of course, training the Ukrainian pilots on these jets. And finally, it has to be said, when it comes to the UK, if you think we were pretty poor in the number of tanks we were able to give to the Ukrainians, I'm imagining that the fighter jet situation would be even worse, given the number of operationally available Typhoon jets on the books.
OK, for now. Thanks very much, Deborah. Thank you. Also making news for you on the breakfast programme this morning, Priscilla Presley is contesting the will of her late daughter, Lisa Marie, after she died earlier this month. An amendment to the will made it in 2016 removes Elvis's ex-wife as an overseer of her daughter's estate, replaced instead by Lisa Marie's two eldest children. Priscilla's legal team claim the document was suspiciously altered and are questioning the authenticity of a signature. Former Wales rugby captain Gareth Thomas will pay £75,000 to settle a legal case with an ex-partner who accused him of deceptively transmitting HIV. Ian Baum sued Thomas for allegedly hiding his HIV status and failing to take reasonable care not to pass the virus on. Mr Thomas has said the settlement was not an admission of liability or guilt. Coastal homes worth almost £600 million in England could be lost to the sea, according to a climate action group. The coastal communities that could lose the most homes include areas in Cornwall, Cumbria and Dorset. Now, everyone in England is to live within a 15-minute walk from a green space or water under new plans being proposed by the government. An announcement today will build on the government's 25-year environment plan laid out in 2018. The government will commit to restoring at least 1.2 million acres of wildlife habitats to protect the country's rarest species. This involves 70 projects, including 25 new or expanded national nature reserves. Around 400 miles of river will be restored through landscape recovery projects. And through government schemes, farmers will be incentivised to adopt nature-friendly farming practices and encouraged to restore hedge growth. The death toll from a suicide bombing at a mosque in Pakistan has climbed to 83 after more bodies were discovered. 57 people were injured in the explosion inside a police compound in the city of Peshawar. The blast caused the roof of the mosque to collapse. It's unclear who was behind the attack. The Pakistani Taliban said they were not responsible. Australia's Nuclear Safety Agency has joined a hunt for a tiny radioactive capsule missing somewhere in the outback. A specialist team has been sent with equipment to detect the capsule, which is believed to have fallen from a truck that had travelled 870 miles in Western Australia. The incident triggered a radiation alert from large parts of the state. Still to come on the programme for you. After 8, joined by former Tory Cabinet Minister Jacob Rees-Mogg, who's attacked the government's anti-strike laws. Speaking to an amputee who's going for gold after rediscovering his love for table tennis. And as campaigners warn homes worth hundreds of millions of pounds could be lost to the sea, speaking to someone who lost their home in a tidal surge. The US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, will meet the Palestinian leader, Mahmoud Abbas, later this morning. Yesterday, Mr Blinken met with the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. Let's speak to our Middle East correspondent, should we? Alistair Bunkle, standing by in Jerusalem. Hello to you, Ali. Good morning. What came out of yesterday's talks?
Well, I mean, there was a press conference between Antony Blinken and Benjamin Netanyahu after their talks yesterday, which the most interesting element I found from it was that in the Israeli Prime Minister's remarks, he made no mention of the recent violence or the terror attacks that have struck Jerusalem over the last couple of days. So maybe that speaks to where the Israeli government is on this at the moment and how much they want to enter into those discussions with the Americans. Of course, this trip was planned before the recent spate of violence, and there are other topics on the agenda that the Israelis want to discuss. For example, the threat coming from Iran. But it has taken on a greater urgency because of the spike in violence. And Antony Blinken was very clear that he's coming here calling for calm and calling for both sides to do something to de-escalate the situation. It's not really clear what he can do beyond that. I don't think we're going to see any kind of particularly significant change in US policy towards Israel and Palestine. I don't think we're going to see any kind of breakthrough. I think the best that the US Secretary of State can hope for is that he manages to convince both sides to keep the situation reasonably stable at the moment. But he will have those conversations today with the Palestinian leadership in Ramallah, and he will again ask them to try and do something to calm the violence here.
OK, Alistair, for now, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Later this hour, we'll be joined by the Israeli ambassador to the UK, Zippy Otoveli. And then tomorrow morning, we'll be joined by the Palestinian ambassador to the UK, Hussam Zomlot. Returning now to one of our top stories, I should say, strikes. MPs have backed anti-strike legislation aimed at enforcing minimum service levels for some sectors during strikes. Let's talk about it in more detail, should we? The Minister for Roads and Local Transport, Richard Holden, is here with us now. Hi, good morning.
Morning, Kate.
I'm not sure you've been on my sofa.
I haven't been on your sofa
You're
before.
very welcome to join us. I hope you were offered a cup of tea, etc. Talk to me about the strikes. Schools are struggling to plan for tomorrow's strikes. Apparently, unions told members to keep head teachers in the dark. Is that irresponsible or smart tactic?
Look, I don't want to see any strikes happening at all. And when strike action is happening, I want as much information to be made available as possible. What we saw during the pandemic was kids' education massively being affected by having to not be in school, not be able to learn and not have that teachers there in front of them. I don't want to see that strike action happening now. Those kids have already had a really tough time over the last few years. I think we should have teachers in the classroom teaching where possible. And I don't think we want to make it even more difficult for head teachers to prepare at the moment.
OK, so are the tactics smart or are they irresponsible?
Well, I don't think it's responsible for teachers to be going out on strike at this moment in time. I think we've seen, as I've said, a couple of years where it's been really tough for kids. I've been in a lot of my own local primary schools across North West Durham over the last few months where they've said there's been a real impact of the pandemic on children's education. I want to see us returning to normal, ensuring that those children can get the education that they need to get on and succeed in life. And I don't think we should see strike action as we're seeing at the moment.
What's your advice to parents? I mean, they're doing their level best to try and, put food on the table. What are they going to do tomorrow when the kids are not at school?
No, well, it's really tough. There are going to be people's lives are going to be seriously affected by this. We've seen it in other sectors as well, like in transport, which we know has also had knock-on effects on people's lives, their ability to get to work, to take the kids to school and things like that as well. So I really don't want us to see us in a space where we're seeing so much strike action. When it comes to classroom teachers, the average teacher is on about $39,500 a year. Whatever, the government's already offered a 5% settlement, which would take that to well over $40,000 a year. And that's the average classroom teacher, plus around a quarter of their salary as a pension contribution as well. I think it's a reasonable package overall. Look, I don't want to see public sector workers out on strike because the impact it has on everybody else. And you're right, it's not just on the kids, it's the knock-on impact on wider families as well and the ability of their parents to get to work too.
OK, yesterday we heard how the MOD has been hollowed out by years of underfunding. We chatted to a former senior general as well who told us that money should be spent on defence rather than potholes, given that it's a subject close to your heart. Do you agree?
I think what we need to see is a balance across government, if I'm totally honest. I don't think it should all be spent on one or the other. We've got to see that balance. We can only get that balance if we've got the economy growing. That's what I want to see us focus on. That's what I see.
But a government's first responsibility is to defend the realm.
You're absolutely right. And, you know, we're the biggest defence spender in Europe. One of a handful of countries in NATO which spends above 2%. Well, we could say it's not enough for everything, really, but it's all about trying to get that balance within what is a constrained environment at the moment.
So the MOD defence budget shouldn't be bigger?
No, of course it should, but it's got to be grown.
Where does that money come from?
But it's got to be grown in that sensible way where we're still seeing 2% of GDP minimum there, but it's got to be done in a balanced way with other parts of the economy, like public services, health, education and transport and all those other things. It's all about us having to see things in the round.
But do you acknowledge that defence has to be the most important?
Defence is always the most important thing for any government to do. But I think when you see the way that, you know, I was a special advisor in the Ministry of Defence before I was an MP a few years ago. You know, the way that Britain stepped up when other countries didn't, when it came to Ukraine after the invasion of Crimea. You know, as the UK training their soldiers, it's the way you've seen it now with Rishi and Ben ensuring that we're the ones there at the forefront of sending heavy armour to help the Ukrainians. I think you can see Britain leading in Europe and as a world leader as well in defence. But, yeah, it's got to be part of a balanced package, but I want to see us punching above our weight, as we have done over the last few decades.
To that end, should we be sending Ukraine fighter jets?
Well, I think we've got to see it in the round. I think what we've done is we've led the way with training initially. Now we've led the way with the NLAWs, those anti-tank missiles.
That's why I'm asking whether we should lead the way with jets.
Well, I think we need to... That's going to be a decision for somebody at a slightly higher level than me, with much more knowledge of the situation.
No, you just told me you worked in the Ministry of Defence previously.
I did. But I think...
You're hoisted by your own petard there, aren't you?
I think what we've got to see is that the people of the knowledge of the situation at the moment need to make those decisions. That's the decision which was made around tanks as well. That had been not been an easy decision, not one we made at an earlier stage. But as the situation evolves, the situation changes. And we've seen over the last year to 18 months how that situation's evolved. Only a few months ago, Germany wouldn't send any form of weaponry at all to the Ukraine.
I know, that's what I'm asking you. And the question is, I mean, the Dutch have said, ask us, the Dutch government has said, ask us, and we'll look at it favourably. The Poles have said, ask us, and we'll look at it favourably. Should we be saying the same?
I think the government will always look at all options, but what we've got to see...
Will we look at it favourably?
I'm sure we'll always look at everything that President Zelensky asked for favourably. That's why we've been there, the ones pushing on heavy armour. That's why we were some of the ones there at an earlier stage pushing on his anti-tank missiles as well. And we've been leading on that. I've seen, as I drive up to my constituency every week, I've seen the Dutch forces as well there, helping us train those Ukrainian soldiers too. I think what we've seen, actually, over the last couple of years is where Britain's led, others have followed. We've certainly been leading in Europe on that. And I think it's made us, it's made all of us concentrate on what's very important, which is the fundamental rule of law and democracy, which is what we've been standing up for. OK,
IMF report. I'm sure you're briefed for this one. The UK is on course to be the world's worst performing major economy, i.e. the Chancellor's getting it wrong.
Well, I think if you look into the IMF report...
I did.
What they've said also is that they've praised what the government have done since over the last few months with Jeremy and Rishi coming in and helping stabilise the situation.
Couldn't have been worse, could it? I mean, the previous Prime Minister completely crashed the economy.
What we also have seen over the last few months, though, is that actually the UK has outperformed the IMF's predictions for last year and the OECD's predictions and the year before. Since 2016, we've performed better than Germany, for example, which is Europe's largest economy. So I think, actually, when you see it in the round, I'm interested in outcomes.
That was then, this is now.
Indeed, and they made those same predictions then, and I'm interested in what's
Our economy is even worse than Russia.
Well, that's what they say. The proof will be in the pudding.
So what are you saying? The IMF got it wrong?
Well, that's what they did in the last couple of years, and I think Britain can outperform its predictions like it has done for the last 2 years. When you look over the last couple of years, we've outperformed Germany and Japan as well. You know, these are big world economies which we've outperformed relatively. I want to see us there. I'm not saying it's going to be an easy time. We've got those huge headwinds around energy prices, inflation, which isn't just knocking onto, the fuel at the pump or onto gas, but it's also knocking onto things like food, which we've seen food price inflation so much higher. that's one of the reasons we've got to get inflation under control, because it makes everybody poorer, particularly those who can least afford it.
You say that they are praising the Chancellor and the Prime Minister, but when I was reading it, it said they blamed the contraction of the British economy on a tighter fiscal and monetary policy. That's the Chancellor, right?
That's totally different to what they'd said 4 months ago when they'd praised what the UK government had done. And also, look, the Governor of the Bank of England's also said very clearly that he thinks that the actions that the Chancellor has taken has actually made the recession shallower and will mean that we can bounce back quicker. And I think...
just to clarify, the IMF is wrong and this government will prove them wrong about the economy here in Britain?
I think so. And the IMF has also changed its mind on some of these aspects before, and the figures have shown that the IMF were wrong. That's why when we were predicted to be slower growing than other countries, actually we've been quicker than, say, Germany and Japan, and I think we can still outperform over the next few years as well.
Who do you think will be the best chairman of the party?
Oh, well, I mean, that's well above my pay grade,
No,
Kay.
you've got a view.
I do have lots of views, but...
Well, who do you think will be most appealing to the electorate?
It's usually best to keep those views to myself.
Boris?
I'm convinced that the Prime Minister will make a sensible...
You smiled when I said Boris.
A sensible and clear decision on the future. I don't think, in fairness, this is something that Boris will want to do. He seems to be quite happy doing what he's doing at the moment.
Making quite a lot of money.
Well, indeed.
OK, it's good to see you. Thanks
Nice
very much
to see you,
indeed. Much appreciated. Quick look at the papers for you here on the programme this morning. Daily Mail leads on the International Monetary Fund's prediction that Britain will have the weakest growth of all the major economies this year. That's also the main story for the Eye and for the Financial Times. The Telegraph also leads on the IMF warning, but also highlights Suella Braverman's call for the government to halt migrant boats arriving in the UK or lose the next election. The Guardian headlines the IMF too, drawing attention to the last economic impact of Liz Truss's budget. The Times reports schools face chaos over tomorrow's teacher strikes because unions have told their members not to say in advance whether they'll be taking action. And The Sun has a story about Chelsea's new £88 million signing using racist language in a TikTok rap video. Mari's here. Hi, good morning.
Morning.
What do you make of what the Minister had to say?
Well, I thought it was interesting what he was talking about, bouncing back, the economy bouncing back and that IMF report. And he's very much trying to explain that as far as he's concerned, as far as the government's concerned, they can absolutely kind of defy gravity to an extent, defy those expectations. And he said, we've done it again, we've done it once before and we can do it again. So very much trying to kind of reflect that boosterism that the government is trying to project when it comes to the financial kind of chaos or the financial turmoil that Liz Truss left behind. But what was also interesting was you asked him about defence and the fact that, you know, there's been people saying, you know, how much are we going to be spending on defence? How much should we potentially be spending on defence instead of NHS services or healthcare? And that debate that's been rumbling on for a long time in the Tory party. And he was very much trying to emphasise that balance was needed. The really key question is, how are Tory MPs going to agree on the balance? They are very divided on the level of balance. And there are different factions of the Tory party that can't seem to actually agree on what that balance should be.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting when he said Zelensky gets what he wants.
Yes, very interesting. I think politically it's difficult to say no to Zelensky. Obviously, he's a war hero. We massively back Ukraine as a nation, don't we? And therefore, it does pull on the heartstrings, and there's a lot of political pressure to make sure we are seen to be backing Ukraine on any kind of footing we possibly can. But I think, I mean, you were asking him about those fighter jets, and he didn't want to be drawn on that, did he? But I think it's a very, very difficult question in terms of how do we balance that kind of appeasing Ukraine, but also nonetheless sticking with our allies and making sure that we're not sticking our neck out all alone. So, you know, difficult defence questions for Richard.
Teachers in England and Wales will go on strike tomorrow after last-minute talks with the Education Secretary failed. The Joint General Secretary of the National Education Union, Kevin Courtney, is with us now. Hello to you, Mr Courtney. Thanks for joining us on the programme. Just speaking to the Minister representing the government this morning, he says that your teachers are being irresponsible.
Well, he's completely wrong. The government is letting our children down. There is ongoing disruption every day in our schools. Since COVID, they appointed Kevin Collins as a recovery czar. He gave them a programme that we agreed with. It would have cost them £14 billion. They refused to do it. They cut it down to less than a third. We are hearing stories every day of special needs assistants leaving jobs in schools to work in supermarkets, leaving children without support. Every day of GCSE classes being taught by somebody who doesn't have a qualification, doing their best, but being taught by somebody who doesn't have a qualification in the subject of primary classes where there are successions of temporary teachers because they can't hold on to permanent teachers. There's disruption every day in our schools because the government isn't investing in our schools or the people who work in them.
How appropriate is it, though, that teachers are not sharing what their plans are with head teachers so that they can make plans for youngsters tomorrow?
Well, I think it's very appropriate. You know, if this was the pandemic, if it was another natural phenomenon, we would be doing everything we could to make sure schools were running as much as possible. But the point about tomorrow is that it's a strike. It's a strike because we're in dispute with the government. We're in dispute about that disruption that's happening every day in schools. We want our strike to be effective in order to concentrate the government's mind. We've done everything the law requires of us, and the laws in this country are extremely strict around trades unions. So head teachers know how many NEU members, at least they know how many NEU members there were when we notified them. The number has gone up quite a lot, actually, but we've given that information to heads. That's the information that's required of us. Actually, do you know, most head teachers are supporting their unions are in the same position of being in dispute with the government about these questions, and they want the action to be successful. They want the pressure to be on government to change so that things get better for the children in our schools.
So what do you hope to achieve by not telling head teachers what you plan?
Well, as I've just said, we hope that we want our strike to be effective tomorrow in order to concentrate government's mind. We're in dispute. The next day of strike action is February the 28th. We're hoping to avoid that next day of strike action. We're hoping to avoid the next day of strike action after that on the 15th and 16th of March. We want the government to concentrate and come to the table and bring proposals that can help us resolve the dispute by helping us ensure we have enough teachers and special needs assistants and TAs in our schools so that education isn't disrupted every day the way it is at the moment.
I understand that, Mr. Courtney, but I'm asking specifically, by not telling head teachers what the plan is, what do you think will happen tomorrow?
Well, head teachers should be planning on the basis that NEU members are on strike. And we've given them that information and they can plan on that basis.
But it could mean that some NEU members go in, some don't. Some kids might get to school and then be turned around and sent back again. What? I don't understand.
Well, I don't think that will be the case in very many situations. Lots of schools will have made a decision to close. Some will be keeping some classes open because some teachers will have told the head that they're going to be in school on that day. But the whole point of this is to put pressure on government to come to the table so we can stop the disruption in schools that's happening every day. We want our strike to be effective. It's not the same as a natural phenomenon where we would be like COVID, where we would be doing everything we could to make sure that schools were running as well as possible. We are in dispute. We are on strike. Our members are giving up their day's pay for a noble purpose, by the way, of trying to improve education by improving the funding and the pay of the people who work in our schools. But they're giving up their pay for a noble purpose. We want their sacrifice to be effective. We want government to feel that they have to talk to us so that there isn't another strike on February the 28th, March the 1st, March the 2nd, March the 15th and the 16th, the dates that we've identified. We want to avoid those strikes, and that means we want this strike to be as effective as possible.
Why did the talks fail yesterday?
Well, because the minister brought no proposals whatsoever to the table. There nothing whatsoever on pay this year or next year. No suggestion of a non-consolidated lump sum, no suggestion of a pay rise. On the other hand, we took to her a comprehensive set of data from bodies that aren't unions, pointing to the relative decline in teacher pay since 2010 as a real problem for recruitment and retention. We took a paper by Luke Sibieta for the IFS, suggesting that teacher pay has dropped while average pay in the economy has increased. We took a paper by Public First, a right-of-centre think tank, which says that teachers and social workers have suffered the worst during this period of wage suppression. We took a chart from the Sunday Times saying the same. We took information that we'd got, that we developed, that the Financial Times ran with, showing a sharp decline in teacher pay compared with the sort of averages in other professions since 2010. Those things really matter to teacher recruitment and retention. We took the report from the National Foundation for Education Research, which says the government's pay proposals will not solve the problem on teacher recruitment and retention.
OK, it's good to talk to you, Mr Courtney. Let's see if any last-ditch talks could fend off this strike tomorrow. Unlikely. Oh, he's gone. There we are. Now, the Princess of Wales has launched a new campaign to shine a spotlight on the importance of early childhood. A warning, this report from our royal correspondent Rhiannon Mills contains flash photography.
Now Princess of Wales, this is Kate showing you what she wants to do with that title. Launching a new campaign called Shaping Us to make us all wake up to the importance of those early childhood years.
During this time, we lay the foundations and building blocks for life. It is when we learn to understand ourselves, understand others, and understand the world in which we live. This is why it is essential to not only understand the unique importance of our earliest years, but to know what we can all do to help raise future generations of happy, healthy adults.
Would you like a song from Nana? Early in the morning.
They're hoping this video brings it to life, showing how from birth to 5, a child is shaped by their contact, not just with their parents, but others like teachers or family friends.
Come on, you can do it.
A message that celebrity ambassadors are helping them to spread.
It's quite a lot of pressure to put on parents, and I think, they are our children and we'll raise them to the best of our ability. But actually, the saying it takes a village is really true.
For over a decade, Kate's been learning about how much those early years can impact things like mental health problems or addiction as an adult. But when families are struggling enough to pay their heating or food bills, will the campaign really cut through?
I hope so, because that is exactly why it is relevant at the moment, because it's exactly those kind of pressures that are impacting parents today. So this campaign is about how do we help parents, how do we support them as individuals and as communities.
The media's obsession with how she looks can at times overshadow what Kate has got to say. But we're told that she sees this as the start of a vital conversation with the nation. We now wait to see if people really listen and want to do something about it. Rhiannon Mills, Sky News.
Well, the US Secretary of State, that's Antony Blinken, of course, he has urged both Israel and Palestine to de-escalate violence and restore security. The region is experiencing the worst violence in years. Joining us now is the Israeli ambassador to the United Kingdom, Zippy Hoshaveli. Is that how I pronounce it? Yes. It's nice to see you.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us. How are you going to de-escalate the violence?
First of all, good morning. I'm so happy to be here with you for the opportunity to speak about what was going on the weekend in Israel. We had a very difficult weekend because, unfortunately, on Friday night, when people were going out of a synagogue, Shabbat is the holy day in our week, and they went from the synagogue to go and have their nice Friday night dinner. They were attacked by a Palestinian terrorist, firing with gun, killing 7 people. Some of the people, I think people were heartbroken when they saw the faces of Asher was a 14-year-old young boy, and a nice couple, Natalie and Ellie, that just got married 2 years ago, and they came to help the people that were injured. And unfortunately, the terrorist was so cruel that he was shooting them. And that was the weekend we went through. And when that happened, President Biden called right away to Prime Minister Netanyahu. He said, "This is horrific. We are supporting your right for self-defense." And so did the Foreign Secretary of the UK, James Cleverly, that said that on the International Day when we memorize the Holocaust, such horrific sights coming from Jerusalem is something that nothing can justify, harming innocent people. So that was a very, very difficult weekend.
OK. A father shot dead in front of his son at a makeshift checkpoint 2 weeks ago. Israeli soldiers saying he had a knife, later admitted he was unarmed. There is violence on both sides. How are you going to sort it out?
So it's not violence on both sides.
Well, that seems pretty violent.
So the way we see it, Israel is under attack, under terrorism. And what we do is, in order to defend ourselves, the government is committed to defend its people. We don't want people to be shot when they walk in the streets. So this is our obligation. So when we do military actions like we did the defense actions in Jenin last week, it's because we had intelligence alert on another terror attack that was supposed to come from Jenin. Jenin became a terror hub. Unfortunately, the Palestinian Authority is at the moment one of its weakness points where they cannot do anything. So this creates a vacuum, and these terror hubs need to be controlled. And in order to control that, in order to defend people, not to have more terror attacks in our streets, we send our defense forces in order to make sure that those kind of terror attacks won't be a daily thing.
Your Interior Minister is a convicted racist and has extreme views towards Palestinians, but he's now in charge of policing them. What faith should the international community have in that?
Well, the Israeli Supreme Court makes the decision who's racist and who's not. And it was very clear when he was running to office to go into the Knesset that the Israeli Supreme Court says that on the base of his manifesto is not under this definition. So, first of all, I don't agree with the description. But if we go back,
policing the Palestinians, and he has extreme views about them.
But if we go back to the Israeli government is a coalition government. It's something that in the UK is not something you have many times. I mean, you're used to different type of system.
What's that got to do with his views on Palestine?
I explained because his views on Palestine have been under review, under judicial review of our Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said very clearly that he put one thing in his manifesto, which is safety in the streets of Israel, and this is why he was elected. So I just don't agree with the description. But if we go back to the government is being ruled by Benjamin Netanyahu's party. This is the dominant party. And
charges of fraud hanging over him.
This is something being checked in a court. And I think his leadership for the last 20 years was dominated by a vision of creating more peace with our neighbours. As you know, the Abraham Accords is something that happened under his leadership. So in the last 2 years, we had more and more countries joining to the peace circle. And actually the visit of Antony Blinken yesterday, one of the main issues in this visit is how to extend the peace circle and how to bring Saudi Arabia into the circle, how to make sure that the region will be more safe. So I really think that this is a good role model of how Israel and the Arab world can create great things together, because the Abraham Accords has been a wonderful success.
OK, talk to me about why you would bring gun licences. Why are you loosening gun licences for Israelis? How's that not going to exacerbate the situation?
So I'm very happy you're asking about that, because I don't know if people are familiar with our very, very strict gun laws. So Israel has a very strict gun laws, and what the government is doing is basically allowing just the people that already have a license, people that are trained, are well-trained, are part of security and defense forces, just to carry their guns in order to, prevent this horrific kind of, terror violence. You're going to
shoot somebody.
We're not going to hand out guns. I mean, just to make it sure and clear.
If you've got a gun, you only have a gun to shoot somebody.
No, but we have guns in order to defend ourselves. Many people in Israel, as you know, we have...
But how do you defend yourself?
No, just to explain how the Israeli system works. We have a very strict gun laws. And the people that are allowed to carry guns are people that are trained in our security systems, because many people, as you know, in Israel work on security work. So part of the work of those security people is, if something horrific like happened Friday night is happening, is to protect the people. So this is part of their duty, or their civil duty. But we are not handing over guns, and the Prime Minister said it very clearly. No one is taking the law into his hands. We have policing forces and we have defense forces in order to do that. No one is encouraging violence. Actually, we want to de-escalate.
So normal civilians will not be getting guns?
Absolutely not.
OK,
This
so
is not part of the policy.
What is actually happening then when you are relaxing the gun laws? What does that actually mean?
It's not really relaxing gun laws. It's more the people that are already trained and they're able, that they will be encouraged to carry those guns in order to protect people. Sometimes they take the police,
shoot people.
Not to shoot people, to protect people if they're under terror attack. And just to go back to our history, so many times in our history, including, by the way, the mayor of Jerusalem that was involved in the middle of a scene of terrorism. So he had to run after a terrorist when he was firing and shooting people in the streets of Jerusalem. So unfortunately, because Israel has such a bad experience with terrorism in our streets, sometimes people that carry guns because they're part of security and defense forces, they actually saved lives. So we're not speaking in any way on something that is, handing over guns.
There has to be peace. Otherwise, we will continue to see the death toll rise. Talk to me about the importance of taking the houses from the families of those that are caught up in terrorism. What's the point of that?
First of all, let's start with what you started. There must be peace. So why there is no peace? If Israel is doing so well with Egypt, with Jordan, we have a proven record of a country that seeks peace and wants peace. So why is it so hard with our neighbours, the Palestinians? And I think some of the answer comes from the horrible incitement that brings a 13-year-old boy to take a gun and, as you said, to shot a father and a son, one after the other. A 13-year-old boy, can you imagine a 13-year-old boy anywhere else in the world taking a gun, firing, trying to kill innocent people? I think it's the incitement.
So why then demolish his family's home?
Again, so the reason we're doing it is in order to discourage the other people to be involved with terrorism.
So it's not just the child's responsibility, it's the whole family that is responsible for
the way we see it, it's not the family's responsibility or any. We see it as, look at what is happening with the Palestinian Authority delivering financial support to everyone who's involved with terrorism. There is so much incentive under the Palestinian leadership to be involved with terrorism. They actually deliver candies after terror attacks.
Just to be clear, you're trying to disincentivise other families by demolishing the homes of those.
We make sure that people will understand that they need to pay a price for terrorism, because at the moment the only price they're getting is rewards from the Palestinian Authority.
My question is it the whole family's responsibility?
We're saying again, this is not a punishment for the family. It's
actually, it is if you're bulldozing their house down.
Because you need to take responsibility for the fact that your Palestinian Authority is actually giving you this motivation to go and kill innocent Jews in the streets. I mean, this is a pure anti-Semitism. Think about it. If someone would have taken a gun here in London, would have shot Jews just because they're Jews, the whole country would have been in headlines saying, this is horrific, this is anti-Semitism. In Israel, in some very strange way, people are saying, no, well, you need to understand the circumstances. Nothing can justify hurting innocent people. And this is what's happening in our streets.
On both sides, I suppose, is what Antony
But again,
Blinken
we don't hurt
saying.
Innocent people.
Well, as I just pointed out to you, there was
we don't target
shot,
innocent people.
At a checkpoint, and he was unarmed in front of his child.
That actually, it's not correct, because we never target innocent people, never. Israel is doing everything in order to target terrorists. And this is what we need to do in order to make sure that our streets will be peaceful.
What would be a good result when Antony Blinken gets back on the plane to go back to America?
So there are three issues that he came to discuss. First is Palestinian terrorism. And I think part of it is, again, to make sure the leadership of the Palestinians will be taken into account for those horrible incitements and the fact they're celebrating when Jews being killed.
30 seconds.
The second issue is Iran. I think this is the most important, and extending the circle of peace. So I think altogether, I think it will be very successful. We'll extend circle of peace and we'll continue to do the great work we do on Iran. We just had the biggest exercise between Israeli defense forces and American defense forces last week.
We are out of time. Thank you, Your Excellency, for joining us on
the
programme.
I really appreciate it. Hope for peaceful days.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
It's good to see you. Thank you for joining us on the programme this morning. Bear with me 1 second, if you would, please. Coming up in just a few moments' time, we'll be actually tomorrow interviewing the Palestinian ambassador to the UK, Hussam Zomlot, and I will be asking him what he's going to do for peace.